So, Twitter and Facebook have really taken very different approaches when dealing with the president's, at times, very controversial, misleading, incorrect information that he posts on their social media platforms. For Facebook, they've sort of adopted a hands-off approach to posts from the president. Twitter, on the other hand, seems to have changed things a little. Twitter recently censored a tweet from the president with a warning label marking it as glorifying violence. Well, last week, President Trump signed an executive order largely seen as retaliation for that rebuke, while praising Facebook and its founder, Mark Zuckerberg. So a story by the New York Times puts these dynamics into perspective. Technology reporter for the Times, Mike Isaac, is a co-author of that piece and is here to talk to us more about it. And, I should point out that executive order, many have said, is essentially teethless, that the president really didn't have the authority to do what the executive order states to muzzle Twitter. But let us go on. First off, I gave people sort of a little bit of an example of the difference between how Twitter and Facebook has been dealing with the president, but I want you to talk a little bit more about that. How the two platforms have dealing with the president's messaging versus regular people who use that platform maybe saying very similar things to the president, and how those platforms handle that.
Yeah, totally. So I think there's a bunch of different standards that the companies use that everyone's trying to work through right now. I think, and historically, Facebook and Twitter would generally give the president a lot of latitude on what he was saying when he would make his tweets or posts that might not fly for normal users. There's been posts in the past where folks have argued this is inciting division or breaking different kinds of platform rules that Twitter or Facebook might have. I think we really hit a tipping point over the past 2 weeks with some of these particular posts that were specific to rules around incitement to violence or voter suppression tactics. And basically we saw the difference between the two networks and which ones drew the line in the sand. And Twitter decided that the president did essentially break those rules, while Facebook was able to find a way around it essentially and say that there was still room for his type of speech. And then they also used this sort of newsworthiness standard where basically because he's the president, he should be allowed to say it on the platform. So there really are a number of different standards for how they judge politicians, especially the president, compared to normal folks like you and I.
So is there also a way then to measure Twitter and Facebook's reach and their effect on the political mood in the country?
That's a great question. I think the question has always been, are these companies? I think this is a tension that actually the CEOs ask themselves too, which is like, are they helping? Are they a net positive effect? Are they giving people enough of a voice that makes it a positive sort of outcome here, or is this harmful? Right? Is this actually being used to spread more disinformation, more discontent? I just find it a real difficult thing to even measure, and I think these companies don't really know how to. Couldn't tell you either way, but they have to believe that they're doing an overall net positive. On this call that Mark Zuckerberg had yesterday or the day before with his employees, he ended it by saying, I know we're through a hard time right now, and I know not everyone agrees with me, but I think what we're doing is an overall net positive compared to the bad things that can be used on this network. So that's generally what they'll fall back on at the end of the day, that we're doing more good than harm, basically.
There have been a couple of reports out there that suggested during the looting and the shooting tweet fallout that the president spoke to Mark Zuckerberg. We know he's been on Capitol Hill several times, and so there's some reporting that they talked to each other on the phone. And according to some of the reporting, this was when the president's own people were sort of begging him to, either remove the tweet or correct it. And later on, he kind of tweeted out that everyone was misinterpreting him because they're all haters. Essentially, I'm paraphrasing the tweet.
Right.
I'm wondering if, it it seems like the two CEOs of both of Twitter and Facebook have different approaches when it comes to the president, that Zuckerberg is choosing to keep the lines of communication open, if you will, or at least have a friendlier personal relationship with the president. And is that having an impact on the way the platforms deal with his messaging?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. Like, part of it, I do think, has been the different approaches that go back a number of years between the companies. You know, Facebook, back in, I want to say 2014 or 2015, there was a controversy on the platform around one of its products called Trending Topics. And there was a news story that said, you know, Facebook was suppressing conservatives and, you know, conservatives weren't getting a fair shake and blah, blah, blah. We ended up batting that down. There wasn't really any truth to it. But ever since then, Facebook has been really concerned that they are alienating conservatives on the platform, or that they might tick off the right wing and make conservatives in the White House or in Congress upset. So they've had a real strong open dialogue with folks in the White House and in Congress. Their lobbyists are all over the Hill. I think that's not really the same for Twitter. They don't have the same labor lobbyist force that Facebook has. Jack doesn't take calls with the president as frequently as Zuckerberg does. We heard on Zuckerberg in his call with employees the other day said he made his decision last Friday to keep the post up. Then the president gave him a call directly, and Zuckerberg decided to express how he, you know, sort of vehemently disagreed with the rhetoric around his post, and but at the same time would still stand by his decision to keep it up. So he's doing this real tightrope walk of a dance where he doesn't want to anger the right, but also doesn't want to lose his employees and the rest of the country in the process who are upset with it.
I know you have to leave. Why do you think Twitter changed course now?
Yeah, I think Twitter. So they've been in this process over the past few years of redoing all their guidelines. I think they have finally gotten to a point where they're like, well, we either have to enforce what we write or not. Plus, I do think last week there was a period where the White House started going after one of Twitter's employees in public, and that really made a lot of people inside the company really mad. And I think that sort of had at least some mental effect on how they were going to deal with this whole thing. So for Twitter, it finally crossed the line. I don't know if that line has been crossed for Facebook quite yet.
Really fascinating discussion. Mike Isaac, technology reporter for the New York Times. We appreciate it, man. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.